She was late. Just 12 minutes. Not because she overslept, but because her son's school called. She chose to be a mother first, and for that, her boss humiliated her in front of everyone. What he didn't know: that same son was coming back. And the next time he walked into that office, everything would change. It was 8:12 a.m. when Michelle Daniels walked through the front glass doors of Halston and Company. 12 minutes late. She didn't make excuses. She didn't run. She didn't try to hide the circles under her eyes or the fact that her hair was tied back in a rush. She just walked in. Tired, quiet, and holding on to the last thread of her morning with the kind of dignity only single mothers understand. She had left her apartment 40 minutes earlier, but her son, Jalen, had dropped his lunch on the stairwell. The school called because he was upset. He didn't want to go in without her. So Michelle did what any real mother would do. She circled back, hugged him until his little shoulders stopped shaking, and walked him inside, even if it meant missing her 8 o'clock clock-in. She had worked at Halston and Company for 4 years. Never called in sick. Covered shifts when no one else wanted to. Stayed late, skipped lunch, smiled at customers when her feet ached and her hands were cracked from cleaning chemicals. But that didn't matter now. Because when she reached the front desk, the receptionist, Jenna, looked up, almost startled, and said, "He's waiting for you in the main office." Michelle didn't have to ask who. There was only one he who summoned people like that. Gavin Halston. The man whose name was on the building. The one who wore designer shoes but complained about employees taking 2 napkins instead of 1. The one who never learned her son's name but criticized her handwriting on service tickets. She exhaled slowly and made her way down the hall. The door to the office was already open. Gavin didn't look up as she entered. He was tapping away at his phone with one hand, coffee in the other. "I didn't realize we were doing flexible arrivals now," he said flatly. Michelle stayed standing. "Good morning, Mr. Halston." Save it," he cut her off. "I'm not interested in excuses." There was a long pause. "I had to drop my son off at school," she said calmly. "He needed me." Gavin finally looked up. His expression was somewhere between fake sympathy and quiet irritation. "Michelle, we're a business. You're not paid to be a mom here. You're paid to be on time." The words hit like a slap, but Michelle didn't flinch. "I understand." "No, I don't think you do," he continued. "Because this isn't the first time. 2 weeks ago you left early, and last month, you switched shifts last minute because of a school thing." "Yes." That was his parent-teacher conference. Gavin leaned back in his chair and gave a theatrical sigh. "I don't run a daycare, Michelle. I run a company. And I need employees who take that seriously." She said nothing. "Which is why," he continued, "I've decided to let you go." The words sat in the air, heavy and sharp. Michelle blinked. "That's it?" "I'm sure you're a lovely mother," he said, picking up his phone again, "but you're not the right fit here anymore." He didn't even look at her when he said it. He was already scrolling through emails, moving on. Michelle walked out of the office slowly. Not because she was shocked, but because she refused to let anyone see her fall apart. Not yet. Jenna watched her pass. So did Anthony from tech, and Brielle from accounting. No one said a word. Michelle walked outside, into the cold, morning light. She didn't cry. Not then. Not until she sat in her car, pulled out her son's crumpled drawing from her purse, the one he'd made for her that morning, and read the words again. "You're my superhero, Mommy." That's when she finally let the tears come. But only for a moment. Because even when the world tried to crush her, she had someone watching her with wide little eyes. And that meant she had to keep going. What Michelle didn't know, what Gavin certainly didn't, was that their story was far from over. Because her son, the same boy she'd rushed back for that morning, had grown up with a quiet fire in him. And in just 24 hours, the world they thought they controlled was going to belong to someone else entirely. The next morning, the staff of Halston and Company arrived like any other Tuesday, grumbling over coffee, clutching folders, unlocking filing cabinets. Except something felt off. The lights in the executive wing were already on. The receptionist desk was empty, but a sleek black car idled out front, its engine low and quiet. A man in a charcoal gray suit stood beside it, speaking quietly into his earpiece. He looked out of place, too polished, too alert. Inside, the main conference room was being prepped, fast. Someone had moved the long mahogany table slightly. Chairs were arranged perfectly. Catered coffee trays sat on the far side. A man in his late 20s stood at the head of the table, glancing down at a folder. Calm. Focused. Sharp. His name was Jalen Daniels. Yes, that Jalen. The same boy whose lunch spilled on the stairwell. The same boy Michelle had gone back for. The same boy who watched his mother come home with red-rimmed eyes and calloused hands, too proud to complain but too exhausted to hide the weight of it all. He remembered it all. He remembered the nights she stayed up doing QuickBooks for other small businesses after work. He remembered the Christmas she wrapped a gift from the dollar store and told him with a smile, "It's not about the price, it's about the love." And he remembered Gavin Halston. Not just the name, but the way she said it. Like a weight she had to carry every day. Like a wall she could never quite climb over. So Jalen built his own ladder. He got his MBA by 25. Started a tech-backed logistics firm out of his dorm room. Sold it for 7 figures 3 years later. Then quietly bought majority stakes in 3 struggling companies, including Halston and Company. He hadn't planned to show up in person. But after what happened to his mom yesterday, plans changed. At 8:03 a.m., Gavin Halston walked through the front door, coffee in hand, Bluetooth in ear, barking about numbers to someone on the other end. He didn't see the man standing in his conference room. Not yet. At 8:05, Jenna buzzed his desk. "Mr. Halston, there's a gentleman here. He's requesting your presence in the main conference room." Gavin groaned. "Tell him I'm busy." "He said it's about your ownership agreement," she interrupted. That got his attention. He adjusted his blazer and walked toward the room, rehearsing some slick corporate language in his head. Probably another buyer trying to muscle into his margins. But when he opened the door, he stopped cold. There was a man standing at the far end, reviewing something in a black leather folder. Clean suit. Confident posture. Cool eyes. "You're Jalen Daniels," he said without looking up. Gavin squinted. The name meant nothing to him. Yet. "I don't think we have a meeting scheduled." Jalen finally looked up. "No. But we have an understanding to clarify." He closed the folder and set it on the table. "You've been operating Halston and Company under the impression you own 100% of the firm. That's incorrect." Gavin laughed. "I founded this company, kid. From scratch. I think I'd know who owns it." Jalen didn't flinch. "You own 49%. A silence hung in the room. Jalen slid the folder across the table. "Paperwork. 6 months ago, my firm acquired controlling interest from your primary investor. You never bothered to check because you assumed no one could ever come for your crown." Gavin picked up the folder with trembling hands. His eyes darted over the signatures. "You bought out Ezra?" "Yes," Jalen said. He was tired. "You didn't treat your people right. And frankly, you've been bleeding money for over a year. I saw the opportunity." Gavin's face was draining color fast. Jalen took a step closer. And yesterday, you fired a woman who never failed you. Who built this company from the ground up while you took credit. Gavin frowned. You talking about Michelle? Jalen's jaw tensed. I'm talking about my mother. The words cut through the air like glass. Gavin stumbled back a step. Wait, your mom is? Michelle Daniels. The woman you humiliated in front of your staff. The woman who raised me alone while working herself sick in this building. Jalen's tone never rose. He didn't need to yell. His calm was the storm. And now, I'm here to clean up your mess. Gavin's voice cracked. Look, I didn't mean anything personal. She was late, I had to. She was 12 minutes late, Jalen interrupted. Because she was being a parent. Something you clearly never learned to respect. Gavin looked down. Jalen motioned toward the table. You have two choices. 1. Stay on with a demotion and my supervision. 2. Walk out today with the severance I offer and your dignity intact. Gavin opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. How old are you? Jalen gave a tight smile. Old enough to own the company that just fired you. Outside the room, employees had started to gather quietly. They didn't hear every word. But they saw enough. They saw the man who never listened, finally silent. They saw the young man in the suit, commanding the room. And when Gavin walked out, shoulders sunken and hands shaking, no one said a word. Jalen followed behind, stopping at Jenna's desk. Call Michelle Daniels, he said. Let her know her parking spot's being reassigned. Permanent space. With her name on it. And tell her. He paused, looking toward the window. Her son's finally home. Michelle sat on the edge of her couch, still in scrubs. They were clean, freshly washed, but she hadn't bothered changing out of them. Something about letting go didn't feel right yet. Her phone buzzed for the third time that morning, but she didn't answer. Probably another job rejection, or a friend trying to offer sympathy she wasn't ready to hear. She hated this feeling, like she was drifting in her own life. She wasn't used to sitting still. Single moms don't get the luxury of stillness. But today, she didn't have a choice. Her son had gone quiet too. Jalen was never the loud type, but that morning he'd been unusually focused, checking emails, making phone calls, pacing near the window. When she asked if everything was okay, he just smiled and said, "It will be." Now she looked at him from across the living room. He was sitting at the small dining table, laptop open, fingers flying across the keys. There was something in his face, a look she hadn't seen since he was a boy building things from broken toys and duct tape. That look of purpose. And still, she didn't ask. She knew her son. If he was building something, it was for her. Across town, the mood inside Halston and Company had shifted completely. Staff who'd spent years walking on eggshells were now peeking into corners they were never allowed to approach. The silence in the executive wing was no longer a threat, it felt like air had returned to the building. Jalen stood by the large conference window, watching as the clouds moved over the skyline. Behind him, Brielle from accounting approached slowly. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said gently. Jalen turned and smiled. "You're not. What's up?" She hesitated. "I wanted to say thank you. For what you did." Jalen nodded. "You're welcome. And," she added, voice lower now, "for what it's worth, your mom, she never deserved what she went through here." Jalen's expression didn't change, but something in his jaw tightened. "She told me things," Brielle went on. Like the time she asked for an extra week to adjust her hours because of Jalen's school schedule. And Gavin threatened to dock her pay. Jalen didn't respond. He just looked down at the file in his hands. "She never told me that," he said quietly. She wouldn't, Brielle replied. She was proud. But we all saw it. She paused before leaving. Your mom was the backbone of this place. Now it finally has a heart again. By mid-afternoon, the new owner's name had rippled through the building. Jalen Daniels. Tech entrepreneur. Young. Black. Sharp. And apparently, the son of the woman everyone had ignored until now. Rumors spread fast. But they weren't the usual kind. This time, people whispered with hope. Back at Michelle's apartment, the knock came just before 4 p.m. She opened the door slowly, unsure what to expect. Jenna stood there. The receptionist from Halston and Company. Clutching a manila envelope. "Hi, Ms. Daniels," she said softly. Michelle blinked. "Jenna? I'm sorry to drop by. I tried calling but," she held out the envelope. "I was asked to deliver this in person." Michelle took it, confused. Jenna lingered a moment. "He told me to tell you, your parking spot's waiting, and so is your office." Michelle opened the envelope. Inside was a printed offer, full reinstatement. But not to her old job. No more scrubbing floors, managing inventory, or filing receipts until midnight. This was different. Executive consultant, departmental strategy. Full benefits. Flexible hours. Private office. She stared at the letter, reading it twice to be sure. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she answered. "Hey, Mom," Jalen's voice came through. "Did you get the envelope?" There was a pause before she replied. "You did this?" "I told you," he said. "Everything's going to be okay." The next day, Michelle walked into the building not through the back entrance, but through the front. Heads turned. A few jaws dropped. The woman who used to carry cleaning supplies in both hands, now wore a blazer and heels. She walked tall, not to show off, but because dignity fits different when it's earned. Brielle smiled. Anthony nodded with real respect. Even Jenna looked like she might cry. Michelle passed the reception desk and moved toward the elevator. Jalen met her at the doors. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You already said it," he replied. "Every morning you showed up here. Every night you came home and still smiled like you weren't exhausted. You built me. Now I'm just returning the favor." The elevator doors opened. "Ready?" he asked. Michelle took a breath. Then stepped inside. Upstairs, her new office was simple. Nothing flashy. But on the desk sat a small frame, a copy of Jalen's old drawing from when he was 6. "You're my superhero, Mommy." He must have found it and had it printed. She touched the frame gently. Outside her window, the sun was rising across the city. Not just another workday. A new beginning. 3 days later, the company held its quarterly all-hands meeting. It had been scheduled weeks ago, back when Gavin Halston still ran the show. Back when these meetings were more about ego than purpose, filled with spreadsheets, warnings, and cold silences broken only by sarcastic clapping. But this time, the room felt different. Jalen stood at the front, in a crisp button-down, no tie, no arrogance. Just presence. The kind that came from someone who had seen the top, but never forgot the floor. Michelle sat in the front row. She hadn't planned to. She thought maybe she'd sit in the back, quietly observe, avoid attention. But Jalen had stopped her at the elevator earlier and said, "You belong where everyone can see you." So there she was. People noticed. Some nodded, respectfully. A few whispered. But not like before, not with pity. Now, it was admiration. Jalen stepped forward and began. "I won't take much of your time," he said simply. "I'm not here to lecture or throw charts at you. I'm here to talk about what this company can be." Silence settled. He looked out at the employees. "I know what it's like to be overlooked. To be told your role is too small, or your problems are too personal to matter. I've watched people I love come to work with everything they have, only to be treated like they're lucky just to be here." A few people nodded. Quiet murmurs of agreement. "But this place doesn't work unless you do. And that means respect starts now. Not just for titles, or degrees, or who shows up the earliest. But for the people who carry this building on their backs every day, often in silence." His voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. Jalen had learned something Gavin never could, that real leadership doesn't shout. It remembers. "So here's what's changing." He listed off points, calmly but with certainty. A rotating on-site childcare stipend for parents who needed it. Reinstating family leave hours, and extending them beyond state minimums. Full health coverage across all departments, not just management. And finally, an anonymous internal review line, so no one would ever fear speaking up again. Then he paused. And looked directly at Michelle. "There's someone in this room who already taught us all that lesson. Long before any of these changes." He stepped aside and gestured. Michelle blinked. She wasn't expecting this. But the room had already turned to her. The staff that once looked past her, now looked toward her. Jalen smiled. "Mom, would you come up for a second?" A few people clapped. Then a few more. And suddenly the whole room was on its feet. Michelle stood slowly, heart racing, unsure what to do with her hands, her eyes. But when she reached her son, he gently pulled her forward and whispered, "Just breathe. You've earned this." She faced the room. Eyes misted. Hands steady. "I never asked for recognition," she began. "All I ever wanted was to do my job, raise my boy, and go home with dignity." She looked at the crowd, then back at Jalen. "But today, I see something I never thought I'd see in this building, change. Not just because someone new is in charge, but because we all remember what it felt like to be ignored. And now we're building a place where no one has to feel that again." The applause that followed wasn't just polite, it was real. It was for every late shift. Every missed lunch. Every quiet moment of perseverance no one had clapped for before. Later that evening, Michelle sat alone in her new office. The building had emptied, but she lingered. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was healing. She opened the bottom drawer of her new desk, the one Gavin used to keep locked. Inside were old documents. Unpaid reimbursements. Staff suggestions. A few written complaints, never answered. One of them had her name on it. She read the date. 3 years ago. It was a letter she had submitted quietly, after being told she wasn't eligible for a shift change during Jalen's exam week. She had written, "I understand if policy can't be changed. But I'm asking not just as an employee, but as a mother. Sometimes doing both is hard. I'm just asking for understanding." She never got a response. Until now. Michelle carefully folded the letter and slid it into a new file labeled "Voices That Matter." Because from now on, they would. Across the city, Gavin Halston sat in a corner booth of a rooftop bar, swirling ice in a glass he hadn't sipped in hours. His phone buzzed. Again. Another rejection. He'd sent out 5 resumes that morning. No replies. Word had already spread, about the buyout, the humiliation, the son of the woman he fired taking his chair. He tried to laugh it off. Pretended to his friends it was a strategic exit. But he knew better. Because deep down, he remembered her face. Michelle's. He remembered the way she stood, quiet, composed, dignified, even as he dismissed her like a misbehaving temp. Now she was the one with a corner office. And he was the one answering LinkedIn messages like a college grad. Poetic, really. But Gavin never liked poetry. Meanwhile, back at Halston and Company, Michelle walked through the empty floor toward the exit. She paused by the door, looked over the space, and smiled. Not because she had power now, but because finally, justice had come, softly and surely, like her son's footsteps across the lobby that morning. Not in anger. Not in revenge. Just in quiet, steady truth. 3 weeks had passed. But something deeper than time had settled at Halston and Company. It wasn't just the paint on the walls, or the updated break room, or the HR policies that now actually protected people. It was the way people walked, lighter. The way they spoke, without glancing over their shoulder. The way they looked at each other, as equals, not ranks in a silent caste system. Michelle noticed it more than anyone. She watched Jenna joke with the delivery guy without that old nervous twitch. Watched Anthony, once quiet and hesitant, now leading a project meeting with energy. She even saw Brielle, who had once counted every word in front of Gavin, now laughing, a full, unguarded laugh, during lunch. And yet, Michelle remained steady. She never boasted. Never changed the way she carried herself. Still early to work. Still asked how people's families were. Still packed the same homemade lunch in the same zippered tote bag. Only now, she wasn't invisible. That Thursday, Jalen called a short meeting in the main conference room. Not mandatory, just a touch base, he said. But the room was full before the hour struck. Michelle took a seat near the back this time. She wanted to observe, to listen. This wasn't about her now. Jalen stood at the front. Calm as ever. No notes, no slides. Just presence. I've been thinking a lot about legacy, he began. And not in the what you leave behind when you die kind of way. I mean the kind that happens when you're still alive. When your name gets spoken in rooms you'll never enter. When your actions travel farther than your face ever could. He paused. 3 weeks ago, this company was stuck. Running, but not moving. Today, it's not perfect, but it's breathing again. And that's because of the people who stayed, who endured, and who refused to become like the system that mistreated them. He turned, and this time his eyes scanned the entire room, landing for just a second longer on Michelle. I know what built this place, he said. And I know what will keep it strong, dignity, courage, and respect, the kind that's lived out loud every day. A few heads nodded. Hands folded tighter. Eyes blinked a little slower. Jalen smiled softly and stepped back. That was all. No applause was asked for, but a quiet round of claps broke anyway, not loud, not forced. Just, honest. After the meeting, Michelle stayed behind a little longer to tidy some papers. As she gathered her things, she noticed a small, square envelope on the corner of her desk. No address. Just her name, handwritten. Inside was a folded letter, and a single key. The letter read, Ms. Daniels. I've watched the way this company has changed under your son's leadership, and under your quiet guidance. And I think you've more than earned a place beyond the walls you used to clean. This key opens the door to our new mentoring suite, a space created for young women entering the workforce. We'd like you to lead the program. Teach them not just how to work, but how to walk with power. Like you always have. Board of Directors. Michelle stared at the letter, then down at the key. Her breath caught for a moment. Not because of the role. Not even the recognition. But because someone had finally seen what she had always carried, value. Not tied to a clock-in. Not measured by a title. Just, inherent. That evening, she walked into the mentoring suite for the first time. It wasn't flashy. Just a bright, sun-filled room with a long table, a few chairs, and a wall of photos, women from the past and present. Some were famous. Some were simply former employees whose stories deserved a place. And on the center frame, a candid photo of Michelle. Wearing her old uniform. Holding a mop. Smiling. A small plaque read. Before she led with titles, she led with grace. Elsewhere, Gavin Halston scrolled through his feed in a dingy co-working space in Midtown. An article popped up. How a fired mom's son reshaped a company in 30 days. There was a photo of Jalen in a fitted suit, standing beside Michelle. Both smiling. Both radiant. Gavin stared at it too long. His reflection in the screen looked older than he remembered. Not because of time, but because of truth. And some truths don't fade with headlines. They stick. Like the memory of a quiet woman you fired without looking her in the eye. And her son, who didn't raise his voice. He just rose. Back at Halston and Company, Michelle stepped into the elevator with a few interns. They stood quietly at first, a little awkward, unsure of what to say around her. Then one of them turned and said shyly, "Ms. Daniels? I just wanted to say, my mom used to clean offices too. I saw her hands every night. I think she would have loved seeing this place now." Michelle smiled. Then tell her she helped build it too. Saturday mornings used to mean extra shifts. Michelle couldn't count how many weekends she'd spent wiping down breakroom counters or organizing supply closets, while other people slept in and made brunch plans. But this morning was different. The sun poured in through her apartment windows. The same apartment she'd held onto by sheer will, month after month. But now, everything felt lighter. Brighter. She stood in the kitchen in her robe, humming softly as she stirred pancake batter. Jalen sat at the table, laptop open but ignored for once, sipping coffee. It had become their new tradition. A quiet morning. Just the two of them. No deadlines. No alarms. No fear. Michelle poured the batter onto the pan and turned. "I still don't know how you pulled it off," she said. "Buying the company. Changing it all. Making them see me." Jalen shook his head gently. "They didn't see you, Mom. You showed them. Every single day. I just handed them a flashlight." She smiled, but there was something behind it. A shadow of doubt she hadn't yet named. "But what happens if it changes again?" she asked. "What if one day someone new comes in, and it all goes back to how it was?" Jalen looked at her carefully. "Then we'll build something else," he said. "Somewhere better. And we won't wait for anyone to invite us next time." Michelle nodded. Slowly. Like she was finally beginning to believe that for herself. At Halston and Company, the atmosphere had shifted from cautious optimism to something else entirely. Pride. A community garden was being installed on the rooftop, a passion project Michelle had suggested years ago, and that Jalen immediately approved. Every department now hosted rotating mentorship hours. Not because they had to, but because employees wanted to. There were framed photos going up in the halls, not just of founders and executives, but of the janitors, assistants, and lunchroom staff that had kept the company afloat when no one else noticed. It wasn't just rebranding. It was redemption. One afternoon, a group of high school seniors toured the building on a field trip. Their guide was Michelle. One of the students, a young girl with box braids and nervous eyes, lagged behind, quietly observing everything. Michelle slowed her steps until they walked side by side. "You thinking of working in business someday?" she asked gently. The girl shrugged. "I don't know. I want to, but I don't think people like me end up here." Michelle smiled, stopped walking, and pointed to the photo on the wall. It was the same one from the mentoring suite, her in her old uniform. "I started in sneakers and a name badge," she said. "The room doesn't make you belong. You do that yourself. The girl blinked slowly. Then straightened her shoulders. Later that evening, Michelle visited the mentoring suite. Not to teach. Just to reflect. She sat by the window and looked out over the city. Jalen had just texted, "Investor dinner tonight. Might run late. But I saved you the first dance at next week's gala." She smiled. The gala. It still didn't feel real. She'd never worn a gown to anything before. Never had her name printed on an invitation. But now? She wasn't going to fade into the background. She was going to walk in, head high, not because of who she was with, but because of who she'd always been. The night of the gala arrived. The venue shimmered with lights and string music. Long tables draped in navy. Waiters in pressed jackets balancing trays of champagne. Michelle stepped out of the car wearing a dark green gown, elegant, understated, strong. Just like her. Jalen waited near the entrance, talking with a group of executives. When he saw her, he stopped mid-sentence. The crowd turned, heads lifting. And for a moment, there was silence. Then applause. Not polite applause. Not staged. It was the kind of applause people give to someone who made them believe again, not just in success, but in justice. Jalen walked up and offered his arm. "You ready?" he asked. Michelle nodded, eyes bright. "Let's go." Inside, the night unfolded like a film. Awards were given. Speeches were made. One executive read a list of the company's top contributors over the past 90 days. And at the top, Michelle Daniels, Department Strategy and Mentorship Division. She didn't expect it. She didn't prepare a speech. But as she stood before the microphone, something inside her clicked into place. She took a breath and spoke. "I used to come to this building through the back door," she began. "Carrying a lunch I couldn't afford, praying my kid was safe at school, hoping I didn't mess up again." She looked around the room. "I was fired once, not for breaking rules, but for having too much on my plate, and not being the right kind of late." Soft murmurs. Heads lowered. "But that plate? I carried it anyway. For years. And I never dropped it." The room was silent. Then she smiled. "And now? I set the table." When she returned to her seat, Jalen reached across the table and took her hand. "Every kid in that room tonight is going to remember what you said," he told her. Michelle looked down at her palm. The same one that used to scrub tile floors and pack peanut butter sandwiches and write cover letters no one ever read. Now it held the weight of her own legacy. Not because someone gave it to her, but because she refused to surrender it. That night, when she got home, she placed the gala program on the mantel beside an old photo of her and Jalen at his graduation. She looked at them both, the past and the present, and whispered, "We made it, baby."